Fallout is home to some of the most amazing and fascinating little tidbits of world building and lore that the games medium has seen, and in many ways, it's the main contributing factor behind the success of this now juggernaut of a franchise. From its most basic standpoint though, Fallout is based on an alternative timeline to our real world where up until the 1950s, things were pretty much exactly the same. But in the Fallout universe, humanity largely stayed stuck and attached to these atomic age ideals of the time. And because of this, much of the technological, aesthetic, and cultural growth over the following century remained draped in nostalgic perversion for this now long gone era. But during this time too, with the advent of the nuclear bomb and growing arsenals around the world, along with rising tensions between the United States of America and China, not all was looking good. In fact, by the year 2077, animosity between these two nations had reached a fever pitch, and resulted in the infamous Great War, which began on October 23rd of that year. Both China and the US launched almost their entire arsenal of nuclear weapons at each other at once, and in the crossfire, countless other nations and lives were lost across the world. And for anyone that was unlucky enough to have survived the initial blast, the nuclear fallout would have blackened the sky above and caused extreme cold and despair, along with mutating animal and human DNA alike into strange and otherworldly creatures. And even hundreds of years later, the now almost unrecognizable Earth, now known as the Wasteland, would be home to copious amounts of murder and evil, a quite literal hell on Earth for those of us still alive. However, maybe the most interesting part about the whole series isn't actually the bombs falling, but all the implications around it. And that's because before the Great War began, a mega corporation known as Vault-Tec, secretly in cahoots with the United States government, had set up 122 underground vault facilities that were meant to house and protect innocent civilians in the event that the bombs did fall. On the surface, these vaults were marked as safe houses in the event of catastrophe that simply served as shelters for food, water, and housing, along with a lot of community, all of which could be maintained for hundreds of years post the bombs falling. But behind this facade lied a much darker secret, because the vaults were actually being used as a set of testing facilities on human experimentation and torture. And in the first season of the Fallout TV show, it was even revealed that Vault-Tec themselves intended to drop the bombs first at the start of the Great War. That way they could force innocent people into the vaults to run experiments on them for their own sick pleasure, and also the promise of a monopoly over the world and its people hundreds of years later. And some of these experiments were truly heinous, like pumping white noise or toxic gases into these vaults where no one could escape, murdering mothers and fathers, and then using their children as lab rats in genetic mutation, only to kill off those not physically or mentally strong enough in front of other children. Or even trapping residents inside virtual reality simulators, where the overseer or leader of the vault could kill them over and over again, only to wipe their memories and start all over. The strange and dark things that happened in these vaults are truly unimaginable, but also some of the most oddly fascinating stories to dive into. And without a doubt, they're what make the lore of Fallout so recognizable and ubiquitous. So much so that I actually even made a 2-hour-long video going in depth into every single vault we know about, so feel free to check that out too if you're interested. And overall, these vaults played a key role in every game, as they serve not only as the starting place, but also locations to find endless lore and intrigue to dive into in this series. And on top of this, there's so much more other lore in this series as well that takes it to the next level, like the Brotherhood of Steel, who are a splinter faction of the old United States military that is formed into a techno-fascist regime of sorts that scours the states looking for pre-war technology that they can hoard for themselves. Or what about the Enclave, the remnants of the highest levels of the government who are now shrouded in secrecy, but may even have been the key people that started the Great War, all in a bid to escape from Earth on a massive spaceship and find a new home planet after they knew the world was doomed from upcoming nuclear annihilation. Some of the older lore revealed from the original creators of the series even paint some potential pictures where the Enclave themselves may have been behind the vaults, and the reason the experiment seemed so random and over the top is because all of these experiments were being done to help with deep space exploration for elites who knew the world would end. And just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier, there are even other problems in the Wasteland years after the devastation, like the proliferation of FEV, or the forced evolutionary virus, which was created in lab testing trying to develop human resistances to Chinese synthetic contagions, which resulted in a virus that can literally change human DNA and mutate us into giant horrific monsters that eat human flesh and shout obscenities. Overall, Fallout is as insane and depressing as it is wacky and whimsical, and the endless gore and killing in conjunction with the happy robots and 50s era charm results in a world that is unlike anything else out there, with some of the coolest and deepest lore you can find. Few series are as pervasive and far-reaching as The Elder Scrolls from Bethesda. Taking place over 5 mainline series games now, with a 6th on the way, along with many smaller spin-offs, the world of Tamriel has played host to countless memorable quests and storylines. But throughout each of the games that include a variety of combat, stories, and races to play, there may be no better feature than the series' seemingly unending and utterly fascinating lore. So much so that sitting down and listening to hours of deep dives into quests and theories about the games can oftentimes be even more fun than actually playing the games themselves, and that's because from the ground up, Elder Scrolls was built to capture our imaginations. The continent we play on, Tamriel, is a small part of a much bigger planet called Nirn, which itself is part of the mortal plane known as Mundus. Across Nirn lies many other continents we have never explored, like Akavir to the east, which is home to giant serpent and lion men who wage war and trade, and to the west across the vast sea lies Yokuda, original home of the Red Guards and Sinestral Elves, who are characterized by their flashy outfits and gold they don. But each of these regions is completely shrouded in mystery, with only small tidbits of lore and history we can pick up from the games, from books we read and people we talk to. For example, it was said that the Sinestral Elves in Yokuda had unlocked the power of time itself, and built many great cities covered in gold that stretched across the sands of this desolate land. The things they managed to build and design would have dwarfed anything we've ever found in Tamriel itself. And speaking of Tamriel, at one point, the king of the continent waged war with the inhabitants of Akavir, but was swiftly defeated, and now we only hear tales of what they saw. To the north lies an icy tundra which gave birth to the Nords, who eventually invaded Skyrim and enslaved the Snow Elves, forcing them to create a pact with the Dwemer to live in captivity deep beneath the surface in underground cities, slowly being turned into blind, flesh-eating monsters we fight in Skyrim called the Falmer. And really, all of these small stories and mysteries are what make the Elder Scrolls series so fascinating in the first place, with countless different races to play like lizard or feline humans, or dark and sinister magic-wielding elves. And the lore only goes deeper and deeper the more you step into it. For example, many millennia ago, there were 2 planes of existence, Aetherius, or the immortal realm home to the 9 divine and Aedra, and Oblivion, home to the Daedra and Great Princes. Both of these realms resided in the larger universe known as Arbis, which itself was composed of the divine realms and an all-powerful and unknown void. At one point, a spirit residing in the realms named Lorkhan tricked many of the other spirits and was able to craft the mortal realm of Mundus, which the Aedra aligned with and the Daedra opposed. This resulted in Lorkhan being killed and his heart ripped from his body, with his followers fleeing to this newly created realm of Mundus, and with them tearing a rip between the fabric of divine and human at the same time, creating the suns and stars, which are also the source of magic in the mortal realm. And from then on, the world of Elder Scrolls began to form, with the divines mating and intermingling with the mortal beings on Nirn. Like I mentioned before, we have only played on and experienced the continent of Tamriel, but even within this landmass lie so many different zones of influence, like the Black Marsh and elsewhere, home of the beast races, and the rest of Tamriel, which has been conquered by human and elvish races known as Man and Mer. And for thousands of years now, there's been non-stop political strife, religious tensions, interference from gods, and all sorts of crazy and insane theories taking place. For instance, in the swampy lands of the Black Marsh, many texts state that the Argonian race we can play as in the games is actually a descendant of non-intelligent reptilian creatures who, after eating the sap from talking trees known as the Hist, were transformed into their slaves who were being sent forth onto other parts of Tamriel to eventually gain full control of the continent, essentially acting as sleeper agents waiting for their moment. Or what about the Dwemer, who are an ancient race of dwarf-like people who built great cities underground using tonal architecture, which can quite literally bend the fabric of space-time within Arbis itself, allowing machines to come to life, great wonders to be built, or by some accounts, time travel, which could be why this powerful race was said to suddenly vanish in the blink of an eye many years before we play, and something we see the remnants of in Morrowind. Regardless though, there's just so much awesome lore to dig into in this series, and within each region lies so many fascinating stories that give more life to this breathtaking world. There's a reason games like Skyrim, Oblivion, and Morrowind have such a die-hard fan base, and a big part of that is because of the world that they're all built atop of, and how many endlessly cool things there are to learn about it. Most games with amazing lore and world building focus on highly fantastical or sci-fi worlds, but in the case of the Stalker series, the entire background is based around a real place and event. In April 1986, in the middle of the night, a massive nuclear disaster at Chernobyl in Pripyat, Ukraine was about to take place. One of the RBMK nuclear reactors in the region, due to a design flaw with graphite moderator rods and water coolant, created a positive void coefficient, which caused steam bubbles to form in the coolant, sparking the reactor to become unstable at a low power level when trying to shut down. This unleashed a wave of radiation in the surrounding area, which resulted in countless people dying and hundreds more suffering the effects of radiation sickness. But in our real world, things eventually were patched up and resolved, leading to the ability to even go on tours in the area nowadays and remain safe. In the Stalker series, however, things took a turn in 2006, when suddenly another explosion at Chernobyl was set off. Only this time, radiation wasn't the only thing to be concerned about. You see, in the games after the original explosion in '86, a large group of influential scientists hatched a plan to do some studies on highly advanced and top secret research they were conducting. Codenamed the Sea Consciousness Project, deep inside the radioactive zone of Chernobyl, for almost 20 years, this group conducted cutting-edge research into creating a global mind capable of controlling humanity. The ultimate goal of the project was to eliminate all negative emotions and conflicts in the world, so that disasters like Chernobyl after the creation of nuclear weapons could never happen again. And in order to achieve this ultimate goal, the scientists in Project Sea Consciousness ran many lab tests in psychedelic phenomena to better understand the human mind, eventually leading to test guinea pigs that could move things with their mind, hear and speak to entities in different dimensions, and a whole host of weird physics interactions that were previously thought impossible. Eventually though, something horrible happened within the research zone, and this caused the second explosion of 2006, which increased the distance of influence of this so-called zone, and with it brought many new people to the surrounding area. Most notably of these new people were those called Stalkers. Usually composed of groups of down-on-their-luck individuals, the Stalkers sought to enter the zone despite the dangers in order to extract so-called artifacts which held great powers and magics that presumably were created by the scientists years ago. But in order to do this, in the games, Stalkers must travel into the exclusion zone, full of strange anomalies and mutants, to get what they came for. This results in creepy voices you hear constantly, ghosts or multi-dimensional beings throwing things at you, monsters straight out of a horror film that turn invisible and hunt you like prey, and countless abandoned buildings to explore full of small tidbits of lore that reveal more and more of what went on for those 20 years in this zone. And for me, what Stalker does really well is that sense of dread it gives you, while also making the setting so interesting and inviting and peaceful in a way. And it's a dichotomy like that that often makes lore in games so much more exciting to revel in, where horror and intrigue come to a head. And even just traveling around the zone and uncovering secrets for yourself in a place where the fundamental laws of physics itself had broken gives a sense of exhilaration that few series have ever managed to capture. The Witcher series is one of the most beloved fantasy realms in all of the gaming sphere, but for most people, their extent of knowledge of the universe starts and stops at Geralt and killing cool monsters. But behind this admittedly awesome setup is an even more insane and crazy world. 1500 years before Geralt was even born, the most important event in the history of the series took place, known as the Conjunction of the Spheres. And it was here that what was previously an infinite set of parallel universes and dimensions collided into one another in a fury of cosmic fusion. Some scholars in the universe believe this was purely a natural and rare event of the universe that happened by pure chance, while others argue that it was a deliberate act caused by some unknown higher powers or entities like a society of all-powerful flying unicorn gods that can travel between time and space. And no, I'm not joking. And in fact, even magic itself in the series can be explained from this event, as mages in the games and books pull their powers of shooting fireballs or healing ailments from alternate dimensions on the fly. And the reason they're so revered is because they can pull from this infinite set of realities to create new ones right before our very eyes. But regardless, during this time, the realms and entities within each dimension suddenly came into contact with one another. And this is why we see so many strange and unique monsters and beasts in the series. They all came from this original conjunction of the spheres, which led to hundreds of new species, both intelligent and feral alike, to finding a new home on the continent, a massive landmass on a planet caught in the mixture of this chaos. Humanity originally was a minority on this continent after being sent here from Earth during the conjunction, but due to some universe hopping, political strife, and massive wars sometime later, eventually they would find themselves as the strongest race by far. The Witchers themselves, what the series is known for, primarily due to Geralt, spawned out of a need for protection from this new uncharted land after humans got there, full of monsters and strange entities. And these warriors are created by undergoing one of the most grueling and potentially deadly sets of trials out there that slowly transform a natural human being into a superhuman fighter or witcher that can take on massive beasts. This process consists of multiple steps that test the strength and abilities of each person undergoing them, including the Trial of the Grasses, which involves consuming a series of alchemical potions, mutagens, and herbs that kill most, or the Trial of the Mountains, which is a harrowing endurance test where trainees are exposed to extreme environmental conditions and forced to survive. Only those that pass each of these trials can be named a Witcher, and because there are multiple schools for the Witchers to learn from, some can even add on extra steps that make their versions of Witchers even more unique. And because of their strength and need for money, these Witchers often are used as mercenaries or guns for hire who find themselves intertwined in some of the most high-profile events happening around all of the regions of the continent, of which there's many. And for me, these other regions might actually be the most interesting part of the entire Witcher series and lore, because unknown to many players, there is so much more out there that we've never seen or explored, with rumors of entire new races and species to the east of the massive mountain ranges, or entire new lands with aliens to the west across the Great Sea. And because of the conjunction that took place over 1,000 years before we play, the possibilities here are quite literally endless as to what we could encounter in this series, seeing as anything from another dimension is possible. There could realistically be a future where Geralt is using a machine gun and nuclear bombs to fight an alien threat in space. Certainly something that would probably piss off a lot of the core fanbase, but it fits into the lore perfectly well. And when you add on top of that adversaries and allies like Ciri that can travel through different dimensions and warp space-time around themselves on the fly, you start to see that the Witcher series is so much more than meets the eye. This isn't just another run-of-the-mill fantasy world with dragons, medieval castles, and damsels in distress. Sure, there's all of that too, but along with that is some of the most insane and deep lore for any set of game series out there. For me, it's the perfect example of the kind of lore I love in fantasy games, where on the surface you can enjoy a beautiful world that seems familiar and nostalgic, yet beneath it all are tales and ideas that almost fit better in a big sci-fi epic. And also, for those of you who want an even deeper dive into The Witcher specifically to learn about the entire history and timeline of the world, check out the iceberg I made where I talk about it for over an hour. Nowadays, Myst doesn't quite have the same popularity it used to. It was a revolutionary puzzle point-and-click adventure series back in the 90s, which was less focused on arcade fun and more on intense logic puzzles that made you think. But what a lot of people might not know is that similar to, say, the Witness series or the recent Talos Principle games, there's a huge amount of insane lore behind these puzzles that only gets crazier the more you dive in. In the series, you get to control someone known as the Stranger, who is helping a man named Atreus uncover a great mystery. 10,000 years ago on Earth, an ancient civilization known as the Dani started to create massive underground cities and caverns full of strange puzzles and secrets to unearth. But even more interesting than any of that, you learn from Atreus and his son Gen that the Dani are a hyper-advanced civilization that had discovered a secret method of formulation called the Art. By using the art, the Dani are able to craft novels using holy symbols that, when combined in exact equations as a foundation for life, can spawn entirely new worlds. Or in other words, the Dani were writing books that created new universes, which they called ages. In fact, when the Dani arrived on Earth thousands of years ago, it was not them arriving, but rather them spawning our entire existence from nothing. In the games, we get to travel to some of these unique and peculiar ages, and in them solve puzzles to uncover what's really going on, as well as the mysteries of the main story. And as you walk through many of these now failed worlds, you learn about how the Dani were revered as gods in these lands, which makes sense considering that they quite literally are in a sense. But on top of that too, you learn about how the Dani have been wiped out by a great disease that was spread on Earth, and that the only way to get them back may be to once again create a great new age for them to prosper in. It's such an awesome concept for a game series in general, and lends itself to so much fascinating lore about different ages the Dani created, along with history about their own culture, which you get to see traveling through their massive networks of caves deep underground. And maybe the most sad part about all of it is that so much of this awesome world is unknown to most people nowadays, including myself until doing research for this video. Even the implications of ages themselves and the concept of creating them and all of the great responsibility and consequences that come with that is utterly captivating and an idea that really needs to be explored more. After all, what happens when you become God? And something about the almost eerie yet nostalgic art style and lovable 90s themes makes the futuristic ideal of sci-fi here so much more fun than a lot of contemporary stuff. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend looking into the lore behind Myst and its sequels like Riven, some of the coolest world building out there that has largely been forgotten to the sands of time. And also, if there is a series that could use a remake with updated AAA graphics and set pieces, man would Myst be awesome.